Okay, let's tie up this little video series here about the philosophy of photography. And as I've stated before, we're going to denotate the three types of photographs, and there are only three, or combinations thereof: prime mover, self mover, and universal logos. Of those three, we've already talked about what is a self mover. For example, this photograph is only a self mover. I mean, I know the complete story behind this and why it's so important. And as I've told you before, every photograph is a partial truth. Every photograph is a lie, but every one of those lies is a truth. Now, superficially that might seem absurd to some people, but if you actually give it a long thought, you'll completely understand it. And all absence or lies are misdirections that are pointing at someone else. Like if a woman, for example's is lying about who she saw earlier today, or a guy's lying about seeing some chick that he's cheating on his wife with or something. Every lie is a truth. It states something about that person that they want to keep secret, but with wisdom and understanding you're able to understand by that misdirection, by that lie, either the lie in the photograph, and a lie can be a heavily edited photograph, obviously so, but it's still something that someone either feels internally or they want you to feel. It's either a self-mover to them and or also a prime mover to you. I mean, something can be both a prime mover and a self-mover. The trifecta is that a picture like this one, for example, is both a prime mover, it is moving another person. Remember, there's only two principles in the universe: force and motion, inertia and acceleration. Everything that actually applies to field theory also applies to photography. The universe is so much more simple than we even dare imagine. I mean, I'd happily, die tomorrow of a heart attack if people could see how simple the universe really is. Everything is absolutely irreducible to simplex principles beyond belief. Contrary to general relativity and quantum mechanics, it wants us to think that Mother Nature is an insane hooker on crack. The case is really that everything in nature is force and motion and inertia and acceleration. And in photography, a picture is either a self-mover or prime mover or a combination thereof, and or also the universal logos. The universal logos are the beauties that's present in this is the incommensurability, the point, non-specific symmetry, the ineffable logos of this artifice that's captured in the art of who she is, what she defines, the symmetry, the composition, all the rest of it. So this image is not only a trifecta, but it's the combination of the fact that it's not 1, 2, and 3, but it's a multiplicative of 1, 2, and 3. That is where, for example, you take two sticks and you put them together. You got one stick that's easy to break. You take a second stick that's easy to break. Put two together, they're multiplicatively harder to break. One of the ancient old Roman symbols was a bunch of sticks tied together. Now the sticks were super easy to break, but the strongest person in the world, if you tied a bunch of them together, could never break them. So we're talking about multiplicative force factors of movement, and this is a prime example. It's one of the world's most famous photographs. It is a multiplicative. Not only is it a prime mover, a self mover, and a universal logos, which I'll get further into here in a second, but it is a multiplicative of those three. So we only have 3 twigs, for example, in this picture, but the 3 of them combined are far stronger than the sum of the parts. So we have a strength of 1, 1, and 1 here, which you think together would be 3, but the actual factor that is applied in this particular photograph, for example, which is rather famous, is multiplicative. So we have a force factor not of 3 in this picture, for example. Analogously, what we have is a force factor that is several times stronger than the sum of the constituent parts. The same thing is true of human body or anything else. I mean, you could take a dead body and it's like, well, you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and there she is laying dead. It's like, well, what's changed? She's just as beautiful as she was before. The fact that, it is dead, is a lifeless corpse lying there, you have a loss of an incommensurate point that is multiplicative, that is now absent. And the inverse to that, as for example in this photograph, is we have an incommensurate. People ask me all the time, because I write about it in defining what magnetism is, and I did all translations of incommensurability, or the aoristos dias, in the works of Plotinus, which was rather difficult, by the way. And it's rather hard to explain, but it's extremely simplex if you actually think about it. It's a multiplicative of what is ineffable and indefinable. And a really key example of that, and I hate to use a magnet as an example, but people talk about what is incommensurability. Well, without getting into specifics of the magnet, obviously here we have a block magnet. Here you're able to see the North Pole and the South Pole. But what most people don't consider, for example, is what is incommensurability in a magnet, and how on earth does this have anything to do with photography? Well, hold on a second and I will tell you. If I were able to slice this magnet a million billion times like a piece of salami, which you can't do because it's ceramic, but if you were, every little slice would have a North Pole and a South Pole. Okay? That means that there is no divider here. In other words, it is incommensurate. It is point non-specific, just like a hologram. It is everywhere present. It is concentrated at and forced at the center of every hole, but there is nothing there. It is like saying that there's someone living inside of a house, but if you cut the house a million slices, the person is present in every slice of that house. That's maybe not one of the best analogies, but you kind of get the point. The same is true of a magnet. I mean, this divider between polarity does not exist in the middle. It's like, well, yeah, I can see it right there. It's right in the middle of the magnet. There is a divider between North Pole and South Pole, but it's not located there. It's forced there. Okay? It is not located there. It is forced there. It is point non-specific. Means it exists absolutely nowhere within the magnet, but as a whole, in together, operating in synchronous indivisibility, i.e. coherency. The same thing that differentiates light from laser is coherency. Now, there is no quantification of coherency, but the same reason a 5-watt light bulb is impossible to read by, but a 5-watt laser will burn a hole in your ass, is the same thing that makes this a multiplicative. Okay? Now, this is a prime mover, a self-mover, and a universal logos. It contains the beauty, the golden section, the ratio. It is a self-mover, even though you don't know this person. You're drawn in by the composition, the eyes, and several other factors that make this a self-mover. You know, to actually make a stranger a self-mover in a picture is rather difficult. But also this is a prime mover. But like I said, multiplicatively this photograph has all three, but it is greater than the constituents of its three parts. So I don't know if you want to rate it a 5 or a 10. This picture rates a 10, and as far as universal popularity and infamy. I mean, excuse me, its famous nature. So I mean, it rates a 10, but it only has a factor of 3. But it is multiplicative because of that. I hope I drove that point home to you. Now, so far as the universal logos, if there's anything that defined intellectual, excuse me for such a crude analogy, if anything defined intellectual pornography to the Greeks, it would be incommensurability as specifically pertains to the universal logos. Now, I've kind of got a bad reflection here, but this is like the Hubble Deep Field. We're able to see hundreds and hundreds of galaxies. Why is this a universal logos? We understand the spiral nature of galaxies. Why are people moved by this intrinsically to see certain things and understand that again, within it, just as we've actually tested baby children, they're actually able to see before they've been taught anything. They're actually able to point out and to have a happy face if they're pointed at someone that has intrinsic beauty. So it's an ineffable, indefinable logos. It's greater than the constituents of its parts. I mean, a human being, of course, flesh, blood, pus. You know, you can say, well, you can take any human being, you can throw them together, but I mean, what makes them far, far greater than the constituents of their parts, and it is that ineffable incommensurability. This is the universal logos. I don't know how much you know about the golden ratio or the golden section, but it is a symmetry in the art as mimicked in the artifice. The human being is, of course, an artifice of an art, and the art is that logos, that golden section, that golden ratio. You can go on endlessly about that, but genuinely, to get to the heart of what is photography and what defines what a picture is or what it has or does not have, it can only have three things. It can be a prime mover, a self mover, or a universal logos. As is the case, of course we all know this, that a failure of one or all of these three is just compositional ineptitude or an ineptitude regarding light manipulation. This is what defines professional photographer. And that's not to say some idiot couldn't have come along back in the day and taken this photograph, but I mean, it's a truism that, for example, a blind squirrel once in a while will find a nut. So it's not to say, a complete amateur can't take, one of the most amazing photographs in the world. They certainly can. But doing so consistently and with the forethought to find it and know where to look for it and how to create it, of course, makes the odds much greater. Kind of like someone has the key to the slot machine that knows how to rig the wheels. I mean, everybody else is just sitting there with the camera, clicking away on the shutter, pulling the dial on the slot machine, and they'll eventually hit the jackpot eventually. It's like, hey, 1 out of 10,000 shots, I got a great picture. The professional photographer has a key to the slot machines, and he's in there, he sticks in a quarter and he holds the wheels at the right time and he gets the shot, 90, 97, 95, whatever the percent. He gives it far more often than the amateur does simply by sticking in a quarter and pulling the wheel on the slot machine. I have always thought that was a really good analogy. But that is the incommensurability of what makes up the Universal Logos. Now, this is an extremely abstruse topic, but I'm taking and condensing down many, many books worth and many hours worth of teaching on professional photography and making it into one succinct point in these 2 videos, and that is that photographs can only express themselves as far as beauty is concerned by one of 3 points. A prime mover. This is a prime mover and a Universal Logos. The beauty is present. Someone else recognizes the beauty of that, but it's also a self-mover for me. But it's not a self-mover for you, but I know this person, obviously. So this picture, of course, means nothing to nobody but me because I know the story behind it. So it is, a dull picture to anybody else. Like, that's a boring old picture of some cute girl staying in a popcorn stand. But, that's a self-mover. That's a picture as meant for myself or other family members, but I'm the only person that knows the story behind it. So it is an anamnesis or a recollective device that brings me back to understanding what the picture and the picture's importance is. Your important point, obviously, also is taking boring family shots, even if you're a professional photographer, is that they are recollective devices to show other people, and they are self-movers. Now, if you could take fantastic shots that have all 3 attributes of being a prime mover, they move someone else, being a self-mover, and being a Universal Logos, you don't have 1, 2, and 3. You don't have a total of 3 here. You have a multiplicative factor. And this one factors out at a 9 or a 10. But amazingly so, everything in nature is irreducible. And getting back to, how do you make an analogy between magnetism and photography? And I'll define it really simply. And I don't know if you'll understand this or not, but like the Universal Logos, the ratio that's present underneath the ferrocell, in other words, you'd be able to look at this magnet underneath the ferrocell, you would actually see this pattern, this beautiful spirographic hypertrochoid pattern. That, of course, is the Universal Logos that's present, that you see underneath the ferrocell. This self-mover, the dielectricity that is present in this magnet, this is the indivisible point, which is no point, which divides the North and the South Pole. That is the self-mover. That is the loss of inertia which spawns a movement. That is the dielectric inertial plane. That is the incommensurate point between polarity. Now, as a prime mover, we all know about magnetic attraction and magnetic repulsion, which technically don't exist, but that's a point for another discussion. But if you're able to take a photograph like this, it's both a prime mover and a self-mover, you have force and motion and inertia and acceleration. What you do, just like a magnet like this picture does, is it moves other people. It is a prime mover, which is meant to either induce or repel another. Just like magnetism, when we think of magnetic attraction or repulsion, it is meant to induce or repel another. And so that is the analogy of a super fine photograph, one of the best in the world, and a magnet. And the analogy is very, very fitting and is very accurate. So let me make a really short follow-up video number 3, and then we'll be done with that.